Hello. How's
Hello.
everyone doing?
Great. How about
Great.
you?
I'm wonderful. I'm so excited to be here.
Great.
And I see Miss Wanda Lloyd on the line. How are you?
I am well. How are you all?
We're good. We're looking forward to talking with you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Give us a couple minutes here.
Okay. That's good. Let me go put my dog away. I'll be right back.
Ma'am. Hello, Alice. You were on the screen, so I said hello. Hello to everyone.
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Doing great.
Falcons lost, but anyway, that's normal.
What did you say?
I said I hate that the Falcons just lost 43-3, but that's normal.
Oh yeah, well, bless their hearts. They
Yeah.
get it right. The Braves finally got it right, so maybe the Falcons will get themselves together one
Maybe
day.
so, yeah. Hmm.
Hello, how's everybody?
Great.
Hi,
Great.
how are
How
you?
about-
Patricia and Heard.
Hey, Pat.
Hey, Alice, I can see you.
Yeah, I'm reclining.
Is Cheryl Taylor on the call yet?
Just
Yes.
10 people? Wow.
Well, there were a lot more signed up.
Yeah. And you send out a reminder.
Well, there were quite a few that signed up, and you know how we do sometimes. People who look like us, we're not always at 4, we might be 401 or 402, so that's okay.
How about that?
But we're not gonna wait for those.
No.
Okay. Marion Jordan, Millicent, Kathalina Mons. Okay. Well, I see we have our guest of honor back, so, and it is 402. So for all those who have not signed on yet, God bless them. They'll be here. But I'd like to, I'm Denise Brew-Clofton. I'm the chair of the Seasoned Alumni Committee of the National Alumni Association of the Atlanta chapter. And I am so happy, pleased, and feeling privileged to host our book review today, coming full circle with Wanda Smalls Lloyd, who is also alumna. And I read the book, and from cover to cover, I might add. And I was a little put out every time I had something else to do that I had to put the book down. So, you know, but it was good. And I can relate. You're welcome, because it was wonderful. And I guess we're around the same time frame, because I can relate to a lot of things that you said in there. And I just laughed, and other times I howled, and it was it was good. So without further ado, I would like to say thank you to all of those who are on the call already. What I'd like to do is, excuse me, give you a little bit about how we're going to do it. Since we're virtual, we're going to do the best we can to be as informal as we can, to enjoy our guest as much as we can. And I'm sure we will, based on the book. But I am going to have the person who assisted me in getting her, who's a friend of hers, Miss Cheryl Phillips Taylor to introduce her. And then after the introductions, I will ask her some questions, and then we'll open it up for audience participation for you to ask her questions, because I am absolutely sure that some of the things that I want to know about further, or maybe are not all things you all want to know about. So, and then we will end it. We have a raffle, so if anyone wants to leave early, don't, because we have a raffle. And the raffle, I will tell you, are 2 books that were graciously donated by another of our alumna, Kathalina Edward Mons, who I believe is on the call.
She's on there. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Kathalina. And then we'll have another 2 turns of the wheel of mystery gifts. So you want to know what a mystery gift is? That's it. It's a mystery. So you won't be finding out until you get it. But we hope it's fun. We hope it's enjoyable, entertaining, and without, one thing I would like to say, we have 14 on and we expect a couple more. To make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to talk, excuse me, you know, well, I do anyway. I give those questions with the 3, 4, 5 parts to them. And to keep that from happening, so that everybody, so if you have 1 or 2 questions, 1 question with 2 parts, fine. But if it goes past that, let other people have a chance, and then we'll try to come back to you. So everybody will have a chance to participate. So without further ado, if that's okay with everyone, Cheryl, take it away with our introduction of our guest.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. It is indeed a pleasure to introduce Wanda. And I've done this before for another book club. And so I've had a little practice. I hope I'm a little bit better, Wanda. But I remember Wanda at Spelman. She was a year ahead of me, but we never took a class together. We never stayed in the same dorm. But I always observed her walking on campus because her posture was what my mom had been trying to drill in me all my life.
Uh-oh, I better sit up straight.
Yes, to sit up straight, walk tall, be proud of your height, all of that stuff. And I used to just admire her and just shake my head and say, oh, please don't let my mom ever see her walking on campus. And luckily, we relocated to the same area in Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, where I became a member of, at that time, it was called the Spelman Club. That's how long ago it was. The Washington, D.C. chapter of NAASC. And one thing that stood out about Wanda, she was no nonsense when it came to reviewing books or discussing things about Spelman College. And another thing that we all looked forward to was going to her home, because during our chapter meetings, we met in homes, and the hostess cooked, or they were lucky enough to have a spouse that cooked. And we always looked forward to Wanda's meetings because it was all elaborate, table set, and delicious food. And then another thing that Wanda and I shared, I think we were pregnant with our onlys around the same time. Yeah. And then when she left the area, we were heartbroken. We missed her. We deeply missed her. But she turned out to be such a wonderful person and a good sister. Another thing I forgot to mention is I can remember when she invited or hosted a meeting at USA Today in the conference room for the Spelman Alum Club. So I just miss her. And it was an experience really getting to know her.
Thank you, Cheryl. In reading the book, I can quite frankly understand where you're coming from. Because
Can I
felt
just
like
say one thing? Can I just say
Ma'am.
one thing? I just want to
Yes,
thank,
ma'am.
I just want to thank Cheryl for her introduction. You know, I gave us a real short, an acceptance speech at the National Association of Black Journalists in 2019. I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in Miami. And I remember saying in my speech, people are watching. And I didn't know Cheryl was watching me that way, but it really is true that wherever you go, whatever you do, people are watching you and you have an impression. So I just want everybody to remember that, because this is all new to me. I was even taking notes, you know, posture and elaborate meals and things like that. I didn't know she was watching and remembering all that. So thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl. And with that, let's begin. Wanda, in reading your book, you gave a lot of reasons for a lot of different things. What was the reason that you wrote the book in general?
You know, there are several reasons. I really started thinking that there wasn't a book for me to write. I didn't think that my story was important enough. I had read other memoirs and I thought that memoirs are really reserved for people who were famous, like, I don't know, members of Congress or presidents or generals or CEOs, people who are, or even like Hollywood celebrities, people like that. And so I knew I had stories to tell when I left the newspaper business and I came to Savannah to be the chair of the Department of Journalism and Mass Comm at Savannah State University. And in my role as chair, I had to meet with all of the seniors before they could graduate and have a conversation with them, be sure they had all their credits in order and stuff. And they would ask me questions about my own upbringing, because they knew I hadn't been in the academy for all of my career, that I was sort of new to being on faculty. And they would say, well, you know, they asked me, what did you do? How did you get here? And when they found out I grew up in Savannah, then they got excited, because most of them were not from Savannah. And they would say, oh my gosh, where did you go? What restaurants did you go to? What, you know, where did you go to movies? They would just ask me about life growing up in Savannah. And I said, well, we didn't really go to restaurants. Well, why not? Because it was the Jim Crow era, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. And it's occurred to me that most of them didn't know what Jim Crow was, had never heard of Jim Crow. And also that it was almost like in school, they learned about slavery and then Reconstruction, and then it went all the way to the Civil Rights Movement and really skipped over the Jim Crow era. And so that was one thing that convinced me. The second thing, when I did decide to write a book, was that I thought, well, if nobody reads it, at least my daughter will read the book. So I wrote it for her because I wanted to leave a legacy for her. And quite frankly, the third reason is because of someone who's on the call right now. It's Tina, who was my freshman year roommate, who convinced me that this could be a good story, a good memoir. And so those are the reasons that I wrote the book.
Hello, Tina. It's nice to see you on. We'll say a couple words if you don't mind.
Hi, I just wanted to unmute myself and say hi, all my sisters. It's lovely to be with you.
Thank you.
And as you can tell, I'm so proud. I'm so proud of Wanda. I take, you know, like all of us, you know, even if we didn't speak to her on campus, we take credit for her now that she wrote a book. But I'm not that bad. But I'm right there in the pictures. You know, I like to stick my head in the pictures, but I'm so proud of it. It's a wonderful book, and it opens up just like she says, opens up so much discussion among us, you know, who went through it, and younger folks who did not. So that's it. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for being on the call with us. Now, you mentioned the American, in the book, the American Society of News Editors. Mm-hmm. How have they helped to increase women and minority participation, or do you think?
Well, when I joined we call it AS&E, so, you know, since we're trying to be brief. When I joined in 1989, there were very few women and almost no people of color in the organization. And so the first thing that those of us who were there knew we had to do is we had to make it possible to get more people of color and more women in the pipeline to be eligible to join that organization, because by being eligible to join and by having that diversity in the organization, that gave us the power to build programs to bring more people of color into daily newspaper newsrooms, which in turn made it possible for it really was newspapers at the time, to make them more accurate for those who are reading newspapers and later websites and other platforms for news. So the American Society of Newspaper Editors gave me a platform to help in that effort to diversify the newspaper industry, because I eventually became a board member of that organization. And I also, for I believe 6 years, I chaired the diversity committee, which gave me a direct opportunity to build some of those programs that were necessary, and also to mentor young people who needed to be mentored.
That leads me into my next question. You talked about women speaking up, especially women of color. What type of issues did you feel it a mandate or necessary to speak up about during your career?
Oh my goodness. Probably too many to state right now, but really it falls into what I call two buckets. And one bucket is people and the other is content. And so you have to have the people, diverse people in your organization in order to create diverse content, but also to understand that it's not really up to people of color to be the only ones who cover diverse issues. And so it really became an opportunity to train women and people of color and everybody really, what the importance, we live in a society that is so fragmented. We have women over here dealing with women's issues and men dealing with, whatever they want to deal with, and people of color, and really not just Black people dealing with Black issues, and Asian Americans dealing with the Asian Americans. We really have to find a way and a time to bring ourselves together. And the first thing that we have to speak up about is learning how to communicate across racial lines and across gender lines, so that we understand our backgrounds, we understand where we've all been, we understand what those main issues are. I mean, if we had to rely only on men to make decisions about how to do stories about health that relate to women, our bodies, things like breast cancer, any kind of illness that deals with women specifically, that would never get done. So, but men need to learn about, those issues. We need to learn about issues dealing with men. We, even sports is something that we fought for, because it was very difficult before I got to USA Today to recognize women in sports and actually cover women as an issue, as a story. So those are some of the issues that we really had to speak up about: content and staffing.
Okay. In terms of one of the other things that you talked about in your book, we're talking about now current Black Wall Street. We're talking about Black businesses, growing Black businesses. And one of the things you talked about was in the community, how many Black businesses there were. And I guess the question is, do you think integration hampered Black-owned businesses? And if so, was integration a big price to pay for the destruction of many of our communities and businesses?
Well, I can certainly give you my opinion. That's not something that I had any direct contact with or interest in or impact on as a journalist. But my opinion is the answer is yes. Not just business, but also education, schools. When I grew up, and you said you're almost my age, we remember that when we had Black teachers, they really cared about us. And I did write about that, how important it was for teachers to identify those of us who were on a college track and support us and make sure that they pushed us and challenged us and had put us in the right places at the right time. As far as business is concerned, I grew up in a family of business. My grandmother owned a school of beauty culture. My father owned a funeral home. So we relied entirely on the Black community to support those businesses, because my grandmother was teaching Black women primarily how to do hair on Black women. And the people who would come into her shop for services, especially on the weekend, were all Black. And so when other opportunities came along for us to go to other kinds of businesses, yeah, I imagine most of those businesses were hurt in some way. But so I guess that's my answer. That's not really my story, but it is a story, and it's an important one.
I read about your village experience, the neighborhood you grew up in. And it was actually very interesting to me because I'm originally from California, but I still grew up in the same kind of neighborhood, predominantly Black. Actually, it was all Black except a couple white families and a couple Hispanic families. So it was basically Black. And when I went off to Spelman, I had the same experience with them. They gave me handkerchiefs and little slips and money. And so when I read your account of that, it brought back memories, very good memories. And when I graduated, they gave me more money and different gifts. In fact, I saved the money. I got my first car with the money I saved from their generosity, but it was out of pride. And they would tell me that, you're going to do something we couldn't do. So my question, how did that affect you? And did you keep up with them after you left the community?
Well, it certainly did affect me. As you read in the book, my grandmother told me that I needed to go knock on every door and see Miss Pinckney and Miss Odessa and all the ladies on the block who supported me when I was a little girl, who chastised me when they saw me doing something wrong, who encouraged me, who asked to see my report cards along the way. They would sit on my grandmother's front porch and sip on, lemonade or iced tea or something. And when it was report card day, they said, "Baby, let me see your report card now." And they would really encourage me. And sometimes they might even give me a nickel or a dime for every A or something like that. So they were supportive. So when I came home from Spelman the first couple of times, I went to them and I said to my grandmother, "I don't understand why I have to do this. We don't need their dollars," because they just pressed a dollar bill in my hand and said, good job. And my grandmother she wanted me to know that they took pride in me and that they felt like they were investing in my college education, and that little dollar that they were sacrificing to give me was verification that they had done a good job themselves. I did keep up with some of them. Of course, they're all deceased now, but as I would come home from Spelman, I did come back and I kept up with them from stories from my family members, but mostly I am in touch actually with a couple of them whose descendants are still living on the block. So in some ways I'm still keeping up.
Okay. I had two questions, but I think I'll make it just one and we can open it up sooner. I know Aunt Catherine was a motivator, but you said, I believe you had 2 to 3 generations of Spelman women in your family. Did that motivate you to go to Spelman, or were there other reasons that you chose Spelman as opposed to other schools?
I was told I was going to Spelman. It not only motivated me, it was the only school I applied to because, so my grandmother and her sister would tell me that their father who was a farmer somewhere in North Georgia, would work very hard to save, I think, $10 a month to keep both of his girls at what was then Spelman Normal School. And that was a lot of money back in the day, especially when you consider they were educating girls, because girls didn't always get that great education. And then my Aunt Catherine, my grandmother's descendant, went to Spelman from second grade through high school. And when my grandparents moved from Atlanta to Savannah, Aunt Catherine was in the 10th grade, and she moved onto the campus because she had been, at home, but going to Spelman. And then she graduated in the class of 36. My cousin, Ernestine Walker Baylor, who eventually was a professor at Morgan State University, also graduated from Spelman. And she was the first person in my family to be a member of the Board of Trustees. I was the second. So we have two people in my family who were trustees at Spelman. And so Spelman was in our blood. When I was a young girl, I used to go to those Spelman club meetings, like Cheryl mentioned, as a little thing. And I would sit and I would hear the ladies talk about, and most of them were teachers. And so they had access to young women, young ladies that they were influencing, they were teaching, they were watching, they were encouraging. And of course they would pick off the ones that they wanted to encourage to go to Spelman and really mentor them in that way. And so I would hear them talk about that, and they would talk about what it was like to be on the Spelman campus when they were in school. And then they would talk about either raising money, sometimes to put a little money in the hand of a student who was going to leave Savannah and go to Spelman, or recruiting other students to go to Spelman. So when it was time to apply, I really wanted to go also to University of Georgia because they had the only journalism program in the state of Georgia. But of course, University of Georgia was just being integrated. Charlene Hunter had entered University of Georgia to major in journalism a few years before me. And I wanted to be like Charlene Hunter, who was from, I think, Due West, South Carolina. She was escorted onto the campus by the State Patrol. There was unrest on the campus. And so my family just reminded me that I really was going to go to Spelman, that they did not want me to go to the University of Georgia or even try to go to the University of Georgia and be a martyr, but what they really wanted me to have was a good college experience. And I'm so grateful that they did. I really am, because I would not have had the kind of relationships in life that I have today, with probably only a handful of other African Americans on campus by then, as opposed to the thousands of people that I interacted with at Spelman as I was there and since then.
Okay. Well, we're glad you're one of our sisters for sure. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I certainly picked this up. That you said Clarence Thomas, and I guess it's Justice Clarence Thomas, was in your neighborhood. And so my question was, or is, what was he like in and around your neighborhood?
Well, Clarence Thomas lived in my neighborhood when I lived in Virginia. So we were adults. I did not know Clarence Thomas in Savannah. In fact, he was not from a well-known family. He was from, oh gosh, what's the name of the neighborhood? As a young man, he lived in this neighborhood that was not right in the center city. And because he was a very smart person and people could recognize in him the potential to be something great, he went to live with his grandfather, who lived kind of downtown Savannah near a Catholic school, because they wanted him to go to a Catholic school. So he would live with his grandparents during the week and went home on the weekend to live with his mother and siblings. I frankly had never heard of Clarence Thomas until he became the administrator of the equal.
See.
Which one is it? EEOC, yeah, EEOC. And I got a call one day from Deborah McIntosh, who is a graduate of Spelman. She and I were in school together in Savannah, and she was the editor of one of the Black newspapers in Savannah. And she called me to ask me about, because I was living in the DC area, to ask me about Clarence Thomas, because knowing he was with EEOC, but really not known to be looking out for our interests she wanted just a quote from me for a story. And I said, I don't know, man, I have no idea who he is. And then lo and behold, he gets nominated for the Supreme Court and everybody knows who he is. So what I said about my neighborhood is I used to ride my bicycle and walk through the neighborhood, and I realized that that was his house after he became very famous and nominated for the Supreme Court, because everybody knew where he lived, and he did very quickly move out of that neighborhood because he really needed to live in a gated community, and that's where he moved to because of, for security reasons. I communicated with him right after he was nominated before the committee meetings, the hearings to confirm his nomination, because he was a homeboy. And I sent him a letter and told him that, we were proud of him. And I also sent him a copy. I had a copy of the page made into what we call a Velox. It was just printed on some shiny paper, and I had it framed, and I gave it to our justice reporter at USA Today and asked him to deliver it to his office when he went over there. So he did call me one Saturday morning from home and thanked me for getting it and said it was already hanging in his office. And that is the last time I've communicated with Clarence Thomas.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned something that got among many things, but your father, John Smalls, when he brought you the check to Spelman and you went to cash it and it bounced and you had to pay $5 for it, but then you went on to say that you never mentioned it to him, and his family was very friendly towards you. I was, I with that $5, I probably would have been one to at least say, "Excuse me, did you know this check bounced?" But anyway, my question to you is, what was your rationale for not mentioning it to him, that the check bounced? And did his family, after you became well known, did his family ever become friendly towards you?
I have not heard from the family since the day we went to his funeral.
Okay.
I think I talked to him one time after he came to Spelman. He called me, but frankly, I don't even recall if I had his phone number to even reach out to him. But in that one call that he made several years later, several years after the meeting at Spelman, I guess, I don't know if I forgot it or it just didn't matter, but I just moved on. It wasn't something I was going to dwell on. It was $5. As I mentioned in the book, I got an allowance from Aunt Catherine of $20 a month. So I guess I was in the hole and I was okay. It was okay. That $20, if you recall back in the day, that $20 went a long way. So the allowance I was getting, I had money left over at the end of every month anyway, because we really didn't go anywhere. We didn't need a whole lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about your Miami Herald experience was the best of times and the worst of times. And I like the tale of two cities. So of course I remember that. I remember in the book, you talked about what were good times, but I don't recall you mentioning what was the worst of times.
Well, one of the things that we lamented at the Miami Herald, the good news is that they hired quite a few African Americans at the same time, because in understanding the importance of diversity, it's never good to hire one person or two people in a sea of hundreds of other people. You're still not going to have equity. You're still not going to have an impact. You're still not going to be able to get the kinds of assignments that we should be getting. So a lot of people were hired. I think we had about 10 African Americans in the newsroom at that time. But what they didn't do is they didn't give any kind of training to the editors of those reporters. And I was a copy editor, so I was not one of the reporters. They didn't give them any kind of training on how to appreciate the way African Americans, what we brought to the table, I guess you'll say that. Our desire to cover our community or make sure our community was covered accurately in the community, how to have conversations with us, how to appreciate our differences. Those kinds of things didn't happen. And so my colleagues and my Black colleagues and I were very frustrated because we were there and we had good jobs, making decent money, but we were not appreciated. And especially for the reporters, I think I did write about something called, we had crying in the ladies' room. We would pick up the phone, and when I say phone, I mean the desk phone, and we would call each other and say, we need to meet in the ladies' room because one of Sheila needs support because her editor she's in kind of a row with an editor right now. And sometimes they would, because I was an editor, the other reporters would sometimes share their stories with me before they would turn them into their editor, because they didn't feel like they were going to get the right kind of editing and that someone was going to really literally throw the story back at them. And some of that happened. When I say throw, I mean because everything was on paper, take a piece of paper and throw it on a desk and say, this is a piece of crap, and do it over or something like that, and not be nice about it, not be kind about it. And that was kind of the way newsrooms were anyway, but it was really offensive to those of us who knew that they didn't appreciate what we brought to the table. And I'll also say that most of my colleagues, I was not one of them, but most of my colleagues in the newsroom had master's degrees in journalism, my Black colleagues. We had to be better educated than other folks. And in the early days of journalism, most people who worked in newsrooms didn't even have a bachelor's degree. And so that was another factor, that they thought we were beneath the positions we held, when in fact we had more experience and better education.
Finally, of my questions, what would be your overall advice to women trying to move up the ladder at any stage to be successful? You made great career moves. They seem to always go up. I remember some choices I made that went up and went lateral, then up. Kind of take a step here to step there. But what advice would you give, I'm going to say, to women, to us? Many of us probably at this stage, we don't need it or want it at the moment. But to young ladies trying to move up the ladder in terms of being successful, and because you did make good career trajectory choices, how did you figure out, or did you have a mentor to say to you, Wanda, this is a good move for you, try this, or were you just savvy and knew how to get rolling up the ladder on your own, or a little of both?
I will start by saying, I was going to say, the advice I would give young women is to have a mentor, but I will say that I did not have a mentor early in my career. There were hardly any women, and especially not Black women, who were older than me or had more experience than me to mentor me. And so I did sort of have to learn a lot on my own for a long time. I eventually acquired some mentors when I became an editor, a manager. That was more about leadership and not about journalism by then. So my first advice would be to get a mentor, because I think that's very important. When you mentioned the trajectory, I would also tell women that sometimes, first of all, listen to your mentor, but I would also tell them that sometimes you do have to take a step aside, a lateral move, in order to move up. And in my case, I once took a step down in order to move up. When I left USA Today and went to the Greenville News, I did it mostly for family and not for, certainly not for money. In fact, I took a pretty sizable pay cut, but then I was moving from the Washington, D.C. area to Greenville, South Carolina, where I could take a pay cut. I negotiated some other pretty cool things, but money was not one of them, but it was really for family. I wanted my daughter to be closer to her grandmother. I wanted her to be in the South. I did not want her to go to high school in the DC area. I didn't want her to be so far away from us that because traffic was awful, like Atlanta is now. And I didn't want to have those kinds of challenges. I also appreciated the fact that when I dropped her off at her first football game, just as a spectator, I could just open the door and she saw 5 of her friends and ran off, and I felt very comfortable in South Carolina, which I didn't want to do. And so sometimes women have to think about what's best for me, what's best for family. It might not even be that you're married or have children, but that you need to be near your siblings or your, other members of the family. Sometimes we get a lot of satisfaction from being around the people we love. So I would tell women to think about themselves and I will say that that's not something I did early on in my career, but I would certainly advise women to think about themselves more than I did now. So get a mentor, listen to a mentor, be willing to move laterally sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes laterally, because we all need there are things that we all have to learn. And sometimes if we're on this level and you learn something here, you might need to learn something similar over here, and then eventually you can move up, depending on what you want to do. Women have lots of choices now as to whether we want to get on the fast track or we want to, kind of coast along, and money will come. That's the other thing I tell everybody. In my case, I never worried about the money. I ended up making a lot of money when I was at USA Today and a couple of other jobs, but I never really, my mother used to tease me because she said, when I told her I was getting a promotion, because I kept getting promotions at USA, she said, how much money are you going to, more money? I said, Mom, we didn't even talk about money. Well, you accepted a promotion. You don't even know how much. I said, Mom, I'm not worried about that. And it did come. And I just never worry. So don't worry about the money so much. Worry about the experience you're getting. And have more than one mentor, because we all need mentors in different levels of our lives. One mentor is not always the best thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, I enjoyed talking to you. I have a few more questions, but I think that at this point, rather than me asking questions, I'd like to open it up to our audience and see what questions they may have. So if you want to raise your hands with the reaction, fine. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that's fine as well. If we don't all talk all over each other, we don't have to do the hand raising, but we'll try it the informal way first. So first person that wants to ask a question, please go ahead. We don't have any questions.
I guess they're
Yes,
leaving.
we have a couple. President Adrian.
Yes.
President.
Yes. First of all, Wanda, I absolutely loved your book.
Thank you.
And it was so nice to read something where you could see yourself in it, from your accounts of Spelman to your relationships with your family members and even your career. And so my question is really around, you spoke a little bit about, men either brushing up against you when you were working, and kind of on the beginning part of what we know now as Me Too, the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, have you gone back and served as an advocate for women in journalism to talk about those times other than what's actually expressed in the book?
I have not specifically, and actually I didn't at the time as I wrote in the book. I didn't know, I don't think I had ever heard the term sexual harassment. I didn't know that's what it was. I just knew I was uncomfortable. It made me feel uncomfortable. I was young. I was 25 years old. I'd been married just a few weeks when I started working in the composing room. And it was a unique situation because I was tossed into a part of the Washington Post where only men were working. And I believe I was the first woman to work in the composing room in the production facility. So there, at the time, there were no other women to sort of have that conversation with in terms of helping them along, because when I left, there was not another. It wasn't until a few months later when there was a strike and the publisher, Katharine Graham, broke the union and women were hired in the composing room. It wasn't until then. When that happened, there were so many women who were hired and young people who knew better, and people of color, quite frankly, that I would imagine that wasn't as big of an issue as it was for me, but being the only and the first woman in that situation. I talk about it now, because I'm on book tour and I talk about it in the context of the book, but I haven't actually specifically talked about it outside of that context. But thank you for thinking about that, because maybe there is maybe I do need to do a little bit more of that.
Thank you.
Maybe another book.
Keep your mouth shut, Tina.
Cheryl? Cheryl, can you hear me?
Okay, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
Yes.
can hear you. I need to step away for a moment. Would you take over and keep the questions going so we don't waste
Certainly.
anyone's time, please? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Are there any other questions? Anyone?
We had a question from Catalina Mons.
Okay, please go
Hi,
forward.
Kathalina.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's my friend.
Hi. Hi, dear. Thank you
Hi.
for gracing us with your presence. I appreciate it. Read the book, loved it. I'm just curious, Wanda, as to what you had to take out of the book. What did not make it to publication?
Well, first, let me say this. Kathalina and I met for the first time. We had communicated by letter, but we met for the first time at a Delta Sigma Theta conference in Savannah in January 2019. The book came out in February of 2019. I had just received, when I met Kathalina, I had just received my first box of books, and I had some in the car. And when I met her, she is the very first person that bought my book ever. So I just want to say thank you for that. We actually have a photograph to document that. Remember, Kathalina? With the red and white balloons.
I remember.
Yep. So I didn't take any, we didn't take much out of the book. In fact, I ended up adding a few things in the book because there were a couple of stories that I had forgotten to include. And one of my friends who lives here in Savannah, who is also a newspaper editor, she and I had so many conversations over the years about our respective careers and being women and being top editors, that she reminded me of a couple of stories. And I had already turned the book into the publisher, and I called and said, can I add these couple of stories? And so we did. There are stories that I didn't include, however, that were very personal. Stories about an illness that I suffered, and actually a medical accident after surgery. Had a knee replacement and almost died as a result of it. I didn't include stories like that because the book really was about my career, and I wanted to stay that way. There were a few other very personal stories that I left out. So I told Tina to be quiet, but we really are working on. We do have an idea for us, another. I'm not so sure I'll call it a memoir, but I'll call it a book of essays where I will tell some stories that sort of how I overcame some personal tragedies and try to be inspiring to help other people understand that when you have personal tragedies, you have to find a way out and keep on moving. So thank you for the question.
Are there any more questions?
I see Tina raise her hand, just
Tina?
her physical hand.
Tina? Need to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. All right. Here I am. Hi. This has really been fascinating. As y'all can imagine, you would think I have heard all the questions and certainly all of Wanda's answers, but I've learned a couple of things today. One of the things that Wanda, I'm so proud Wanda just said we had an idea, because I have been encouraging her to do a second book. She has so much in different categories that she could write about. But what I want to ask you is that I think there are probably a number of women on the on the line here who are at the same age we are, who maybe didn't have people to encourage them to say, hey, you've lived an interesting life. You may want to write this down. So I would imagine there are a number of people on the line, whether they admit it or not, who are thinking about writing this kind of book, or whether it's a book of essays, or for their family or whatever. And can you give us a little short little writing prompt here, or writing something
Sure.
that it will give them an idea of even how to get started? That may be what's good. How to
Yeah.
get started. I mean, when you're looking at your life and you want to write, what should you do?
Well, the first thing, thank you for the question, Tina. The first thing that I like to talk about with groups is the importance of telling your own story. Because we want to tell our story and not leave it for someone else to tell it. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about this memoir, is that perhaps in decades and millennia to come, someone will put together a story about me or people like me, meaning editors and women editors or women or leaders or something like that. And I have my story told. And so they don't have to go around looking for it and getting the wrong information, because they can get it from the source. So it really is important to tell your story so that you control your own narrative and control your own story. And you also are helping your community, meaning it could be your family or your neighborhood or your or a larger community. In terms of what to do, I like to tell stories. Sometimes this is just one of my tricks. I like to look at visual images and tell stories by just studying the visual image. It could be a photograph. It could be a letter that you got from someone in your past. It could be a program, a physical printed program of something. It could be an obituary of someone. I mean, there are, in your family, there are so many visual images that prompt the ideas for stories. And so that is one of the things. And of course, I did a lot of reading myself to learn how to write a memoir. I read a lot of memoirs along the way. I actually read about 36 books just before I started, while I was writing the book, because I wanted to understand what some of the more interesting memoirs sounded like, looked like. And I also needed to understand, I read slave narratives and books about slavery, because I needed to understand where we were before in order to understand where I came from and where I was going. And so reading other books is also a way of helping us. Tina and I were both English majors. And so we read a lot of books when we were in colleges, and we had to write a lot of book reports and a lot of stories about authors and books and understanding prose and poetry and all kinds of stuff that we probably don't even remember these days. But all that stuff helps when you're writing. Reading good writing helps along the way. And then I would get a hype woman like Tina or someone who can sort of, have conversations with you from time to time, and Tina's probably my number one hype woman, but I have 2 or 3 other people in my life that I talk to, and they remember stories and they pull things out of me. And so it could be someone in your family. And then the last thing, and this is most important, if you're going to write a memoir or write your own story, please start interviewing the elders in your family if you have some of them. I regret that I did not do that. And I didn't, when you're 25, 30 years old, you have no idea that you're headed for greatness yourself. Therefore, you might have a story to tell, but you never know. And you really should be talking to your elders right now, today, tomorrow. And it's so easy now with technology, because we've got Zoom. If you're not in the same city with them, it's not like you got to get on a plane and go there. But if you are in the same city, just take your cell phone and just, put it down on the table, turn on the recorder, and just have a conversation with grandma or grandpa.
That's a good one. Good one.
Thank
I have a
you.
question that follows up to that. She was asking about writing books. Can you give a little more detail? That was one part of it, what to put in it, but how, after you decided what you wanted to write, what are the logistics? What do you do? Do you write the book and find a publisher or someone to review it, or what do you do?
Well, it could go many ways. I I personally started writing the book, and I didn't have a publisher in mind. In fact, I'm not even sure I knew when I started writing that I was going to get the book published. Because like I said, I thought I'll just write it and then see what happens. At least my daughter will have it, and a few people that, you know, that I care about will have a copy of this thing. For the most, if you're very famous and someone who's really well connected, you can get an agent in advance if you have an outstanding story. But you know, the people who have agents and have an outstanding story are people who have an outstanding story, and they can attract an agent. It would have to be a pretty extraordinary, I think these days, because it's so competitive, a pretty extraordinary story to have an agent actually think about it or say they want to be your agent before you write something. But for the most part, the process for me is I wrote a proposal, a book proposal. And there are books, there are websites on how to write a book proposal. There are things you put in a book proposal. You certainly put, you know, a description of what the book is going to be. You put in it your biography, your own biography. You look at other books that are like that, like what, you know, what's your competition? What are books that have been written and published before that have similar content, which just speaks to the demand for a book. Sometimes it's good that yours is the only one, and sometimes it might be a trend, and people are really looking for books along the lines of what you're doing. So those are some of the things that go into a book report. A book proposal. I had surgery along the way while I was writing, and I took a 4-month break from writing. And I spent that entire time, after about the first 6 weeks, I wrote my book proposal. It was 60 pages long. That included the first, a couple of chapters of the book, because they do require you to have something written to show. I don't think for nonfiction, you do not have to have the entire manuscript before you present a book proposal. I believe for fiction you do, and Tina can confirm that. No, you don't have to. She's nodding her head. She's saying no, you don't have to have it. But for nonfiction,
They just want to. An agent just wants to see that you can write and that you're making sense. So that's why you give samples of your work. You know, so that answers that question. They know that you actually can write, and you know can go ahead. So they can do the same thing. You can give a couple of chapters of the book, or you can give the ending of the book, but the same way in fiction as well as nonfiction.
So you also have to convince an agent or a publisher that you can produce the book. You know, they want to, once they sign on to it, they want to be sure that they're going to get the manuscript and can start working on it in a reasonable amount of time, certainly in less than a year for the most part. You don't want something that's going to drag on for 3 or 4 or 10 years. They're in the business of making money, and they want to get their money now. Who knows, tomorrow's not promised. They want to get it as soon as possible. So those are some of the steps. Do a book proposal, read lots of books, talk to people, talk to your sources, depending on what your book is about. If it's about your career, talk to people in your career, interview people. I spent a fair amount of time in the library. Some others spend more time. I did a little bit of ancestry only because excuse me, I wanted to know a little bit more about my family before I started my memoir, but I ended up not using a lot of that in the book. We used to say at USA Today, for the cover stories that were 32 inches long, you have to do 200 inches worth of reporting for one 32-inch story. I think it's the same thing with writing a book. You have to do a lot more reporting. You have to gather a lot more evidence. You don't always use all that information, but it's all something that helps you sort of put in perspective everything that you've got and then boil it down to the most important things. And the writing is very important. The writing is crucial. It needs to be good writing. So when I shared my first couple of chapters of the book with Tina, and I just sent it off to her and said, "What do you think?" And after a few days, she said, "Well, you tell a good story, but you write like a journalist. I want you to stop it." And what that meant was, it was dry. It was just, okay, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And I really had to, think about what that meant. And for me, it meant go back, look at what we used to call in journalism, put some color in it, tell people what was happening at that time, what was happening in your life, and how did you feel about that? How did that make you feel? Did it happen to someone else? What was going on at that time? What was the price of eggs is kind of what I tell people about that time. That's not that I put that in the story, but I did look at some ads to see what people were spending money on, or I looked at some news stories at the time about what was important going on in the world at that time. Tina's got her hand up again.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of the things that Wanda had, she had a wealth of material. She kept things. She's not a pack rat. She's a keeper. I mean, because she could go and find a pack rat. I'm a pack rat. I couldn't find anything in here. But Wanda kept it. So she could go back and she had programs where she was on op-ed page pieces she had forgotten about. Things, oh gosh, things from her family. Just beautiful, not just pictures, but items, her great grandmother's mirror that she gave to her daughter for a shower gift. So she had all these assets. And one of the things I would say now is, don't start throwing stuff out. If you're kind of thinking about a book, Wanda, most people don't have everything Wanda had. Wanda went back and found pictures. The cover of the book is something that she found. So I would suggest that you don't throw stuff out. Look at it first if you're thinking about collecting things, because you're going to need all that stuff, as much of that stuff as you can get if you're writing a memoir.
Well, it's really part of being a journalist to keep everything I ever wrote or everything anybody ever wrote about me. We call it clips. And so I do have clips. I have everything that I've ever written. And the only thing I didn't have, and I spent a day in the library looking for, I started writing for the local paper in Savannah when I was in high school. There was a little, I think I mentioned it in the book, Teen Times, a weekly section. And so I went to the library and I went through the microfilm and I spent an entire day until I could find the stories so that I could put a little bit of those stories in the book. So if you don't have it, find people who have it, talk to somebody who has some things in their trunk, in the attic or the basement of their homes, family members or people that, if you're writing something about your career or about your church, or any other kind of organization, talk to people and see what they have if you don't have all that stuff. Those assets are really important.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Or if someone can help me because I can't see the hands. I do have a question. You wrote about your career, and you said that there were things that you left off because it was about your career, and you made slight references.
I left things off about things that were personal.
Personal, right?
Yes.
And you made slight references to Mr. Willie Lloyd, and at points
they weren't so slight, right?
Well, in comparison to what you could have said, but yeah. So that's my question. Can you tell us a little bit about him? And it was obvious from many of the things that you said about him, he had to be an extraordinarily supportive spouse. So could you give us a little bit about Mr. Lloyd?
Willie Lloyd was in the Navy when I met him. So he was in the military. And so he had served 2 tours in Vietnam. And we knew each other for a very short time when we first met in Providence, Rhode Island. He was in the Navy in Providence, and that's how we met. And soon after we met, probably about a month after we met, he was shipped off to Diego Garcia, which is an island in the Indian Ocean, where the Navy was setting up a camp to sort of take over so that the British could take over that island. And so I really didn't know him very long or very well when we got married. He was out of my life for 3.5 years, not because he needed to be out of my life. We just lost track of each other. And he found me, he tracked me down in the middle of the night. So that's how tenacious he was about this relationship. I will also say, honestly, he was married when I met him. So in that 3.5 years, he became divorced and he started looking for me. We knew from the start that I was going to be the moneymaker in the family. He did not go to college. He didn't have that opportunity. He went straight into the Navy. His family could only afford to send one child to college, and they sent his sister. And I will tell you, this is something that I possibly could have written. Here's how he sacrificed. He went to Vietnam, he came home, his parents were not in a good place in their lives. His parents separated while he was in Vietnam the first time. And his sister was attending or about to attend Morgan State University. And when the separation came, there was no money for her to go to college. And she needed that money for tuition immediately. He signed up to go back to Vietnam so that he could get whatever that bonus pay is so that his sister could go to college. And his sister graduated from Morgan, and then she got a master's in social work at Howard University. So we were very proud of her. When we had a daughter, he changed his job because he was working for the United Way of America, and he was traveling a lot. He was a film production manager, and he was all over the country for weeks at a time sometimes. And he changed his job so that he got a job working for the city of Alexandria so he could have regular hours, because he knew I was not going to have regular hours. And so he went to work 7:30 in the morning till 4 o'clock, and he was at the school after the daycare after school every day at 4 o'clock to pick her up. And before that, to pick her up from the sitter when she was in daycare. So those are the kinds of sacrifices he made. We had great fun together also, because my mother did not raise me. By the time our daughter came along, my mother had retired and she lived in Savannah again. And so Shelby spent all her summers with my mother. And my husband and I just traveled. We went to every journalism convention. We went on vacations. One year we went to Europe, not in the summer, but my mother came and stayed a few weeks so that my husband and I could go to Europe. And so we had great fun together. Tina will tell you that he is the funniest person she's ever met. There's not a day goes by that there's not something that we can laugh about that he says. He's now 77 years old. He's disabled. He's in a wheelchair. So I'm a caregiver. I'm a full-time caregiver for him, but he is as funny as all get out. And so I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into who he is. And he still loves his baby girl, Shelby Lloyd. And he just gave her away at the wedding on September 25th. In the most beautiful ceremony, where he was wheeled down the aisle by a male family friend, turned around, and he asked, just as the doors opened for the bride to walk in, he put his hand out like that, as if to say, "Come on, baby, I got you, let's go." And she walked her to Dad, and he gave her away in that way.
Oh, about to cry.
I know, I was gonna say, if there's a dry eye in the house, I would be surprised.
I am glad I asked that question. Yes, you did. You put a lot of tidbits in there about him. Like you said, it was about your career, but enough of them for me and anybody else that has a spouse or anybody around you to know that he had to be extremely supportive. Because I kept saying, when she said he went to get it at daycare or went to get him at school, get her at school. But how could he do that? What's he doing on, you didn't say much about his job.
Right.
So you knew he had to be doing something that he could. And I didn't think he was an at-home dad, but he had to be doing something that could shift into gear to take care of her. So thank you for sharing.
And let me say
that.
one more thing. Every time I had an opportunity to go move to a different city, he was the first one to say, "Okay, let's go. When are we going? Where, what do I need to do? How do I, sell the house, clean it up, get rid of, do the logistics of when we're going to drive and all that stuff." He was the very first one to put all the wheels in motion. So he let me drag him all over the country, and he was very proud of the fact that I had all these wonderful opportunities.
Here we go.
That's wonderful. Tina, I see your hand.
Well, she just said what I was going to say. Willie Lloyd is one of the most supportive husbands I have ever met. You know why? Because everything he did in being supportive, he did with joy and with laughter and with a joke, and he never made anything that I was ever around, that was ever a problem. He's so proud of Wanda, and always, like when they got married, I assume. I didn't know him at that moment, but he's always been proud of her and always made a point. I have to tell this funny story because I think Wanda told me that they were making a move, I think, to Greenville. And Shelby, who was, city girl, Washington girl, was saying, "Oh God, it's a country, Oh, what's gonna happen?" She's a teenager, what are we gonna do? And Willie Lloyd said, he let her go on for a little while, but after a while, Wanda told me that she sat her down and said, "Look, you and I both know that your mama is the moneymaker in this family. So if she's moving to Greenville, we're moving to Greenville." Oh, it was the funniest story. It was so real. And so, you need to learn this right now. This is how this family rolls. And he's the one, who set everything, not only, like you say, the move and did the moves and set everything in motion, but he set the temperature for the household. You know how men tend to set the temperature. So he's always ready to go. He's fun, he's up. He's really a joy to be around. He's
almost like Tina and I laugh all the time and say, "I need a wife." He was almost like my wife. Okay, so here's another story. Every time we were moving inside the Gannett company, there's a woman named Naveen Webb, who was she was the person in the corporate office who arranged all the moves. She called the movers and she paid for everything. And every time she would call me, she'd say, "Hey, Wanda, I see you're moving again." I said, "Yeah, just talk to my husband." And I would give her, and put her in touch. So he took care of everything. And I never had to talk to Naveen again. So they became closer than she and I, and we were colleagues in the company. But I also will say, in terms of mentoring other young women, a lot of times women ask me about my relationship with my husband. And I said, the best advice I can give you is to marry well. And I tell them very quickly, I'm not talking about money. I mean, marry someone, have a conversation before you get married about how supportive that person will be for your career, for your family. Talk about that before you get into it. Now, I'm not so sure we had that many conversations, but we did have a conversation before we got married about the fact, in fact, he pointed it out. He said, "You're always going to make more money than me." And I realized that, and I don't have a problem with it. So I tell young women, marry well, be sure you have a supportive husband or partner, whoever that might be.
Adrian, did you have your hand up?
I did. I just wanted to make a comment about that because, there's so many times that we read books and they don't shine a great light on our brothers. And so to hear your story and how supportive he is of you, because as Spelman, we're typically overachievers. And so it's wonderful. You've had not just your husband, but your father as well, your uncle, and how they took you in. So I really appreciate those examples being put out there in your book. So even though you said there's some personal things that you kept back, we appreciate that relationship piece that you did share with us. I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was. Cheryl, I'm sorry.
Yes, I would like to make the comment. From the very beginning that I met Lloyd, it was evident that he was so supportive. And we used to say, Wanda has a good husband. He really supports whatever she wants to do. And that is one thing that I always remembered about Lloyd. He didn't have much to say when we were over at the house, but it was evident to anybody who had a little bit of sense that he loved that woman and was very supportive.
Thank you. I remember that first time y'all came over for the Spelman Club meeting because Joyce Bennett, did I have her name right? Was among the group, and she was my classmate. Joyce is deceased now, and he ended up talking to her quite a bit. So that just brings back the memory. I had forgotten about that, the fact that we had those meetings at our homes, and I remember that particular time when he was actually in the kitchen, which is rare for him to be in the kitchen. I don't know what he was doing in the kitchen, but I do remember that. So this has turned from a talk about Wanda's book and career to a conversation about Willie Lloyd. He'll be pleased to know that, right, Tina? Thank you, Alice. Thank you. I see your comment. Thank you, Alice.
Alice, did you have she had a comment. She didn't have a question.
She just
If
made a
there's
comment.
no more, are there any more questions? If not, I don't want to skip anyone. Well, if not, I'd like to say I have had a most enjoyable Sunday afternoon. I have enjoyed you, Wanda. I enjoyed the book, but I enjoyed you in person as well, if not more than the book.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I will be waiting on that memoir to come out. So Tina, please keep being her hype person so we can get her again to talk about her memoir. But you have been just delightful, and the information was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank you all for having me. I want to first, most importantly, thank you for reading the book. And for those of you who are in process or will read it, I appreciate you all for doing that. I did a presentation last night in Savannah. It was my first in-person book presentation since we shut down my book tour. I was on a national book tour for about 6 weeks before COVID shut it down. So I've been doing everything virtually since then. But it was so different because I was in a huge auditorium with a couple of hundred people and on a stage, literally on a stage in a very formal way. And so it's always good to be with my Spelman sisters where you can sort of relax. When Tina called me earlier today, she said, "What you wearing?" I said, "I just got on a blue and white shirt. I'm just going to be casual today. It's not all stiff like last night's was." And so I appreciate the fact that you invited me, and thank you, Cheryl, for taking a leadership role as well. And I appreciate your long time friendship.
Thank you, Wanda.
I would like to, before we have a couple more things before we